Dadperfectrevenge. The night I found out I wasn't invited to my own son's rehearsal dinner, I was standing in my garage workshop in Phoenix, Arizona, looking at the check I'd just written for $12,000, the final payment for Timothy's wedding at that fancy resort in Scottsdale. I'd already covered everything else. The venue, the catering, the photographer, the open bar. Everything he and Brittany had circled in those glossy magazines she kept showing me. My name is Victor Coleman. I'm 58 years old, and I thought I was doing right by my boy. My late wife Margaret would have wanted to see this day. She always said Timothy was going to do great things, just needed the right support to get started. I called Timothy to let him know the payment went through. "Hey son," I said when he picked up. "Just deposited the Scottsdale resort check. You're all set for Saturday." There was music in the background, laughter, the sound of people having a good time. "Oh, Dad, thanks," he said, but his voice sounded distant. "That's awesome. So what time do you want me there Friday?" I asked. "For the rehearsal dinner? I was thinking I could swing by early, help set up if you need anything." Long pause. Then I heard a different voice cut in. Brittany, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law. Sweet as honey, but sharp as a blade when she wanted to be. "Hey, Victor," she said, taking the phone. "Actually, the rehearsal dinner is just for the wedding party and immediate family. You know, keeping it intimate and meaningful." I switched the phone to my other ear. Immediate family? "Brittany, I'm his father. I am immediate family." Right, she said, in that patient tone people use when they think you're not getting something obvious. But it's really just the people in the ceremony, Timothy's groomsmen, my bridesmaids, our parents who are walking us down the aisle. But I was walking him down the aisle. I was his father. I was the one who taught him how to swing a hammer, how to read blueprints, how to be a man of his word. "I'm walking Timothy down the aisle," I said slowly. "Actually," Brittany said, and I could hear Timothy saying something in the background, "we decided my dad and Timothy's Uncle Carl will do it together. You know, since Margaret isn't here, it feels more balanced that way." Uncle Carl, Margaret's brother who lived in Tucson and saw Timothy maybe 3 times a year. He was walking my son down the aisle, not me. Not the father who'd spent countless weekends teaching Timothy everything I knew about construction, about building things with your own hands, about the satisfaction of honest work. "Timothy," I said, my throat getting tight. "Is that true?" He came back on the line, his voice small. "Dad, it's just Brittany's family is really traditional, and they thought it would be more meaningful if I didn't hear the rest." The garage suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too full of all the projects I'd started with Timothy when he was a kid. The workbench where I'd taught him to use tools. The corner where we'd built his first bookshelf together. The spot where he used to sit and watch me work on engines, asking a million questions about how everything fit together. "Dad," Timothy said, "you understand, right? It's not personal. It's just, this is our day, and we want it to be perfect. Our day. The day I'd been saving for since he was born. The day I'd cashed out part of my 401k to pay for. The day I'd sold Margaret's car to cover those last-minute upgrades Brittany insisted on." "Sure," I said. "I understand. Great. So we'll see you Saturday at the ceremony. 3 o'clock sharp. Love you, Dad." The line went dead. I stood in my garage holding a silent phone, looking at all the tools I'd collected over 35 years in construction. Tools I'd used to build a good life for my family, to teach my son the value of honest work. Tools that apparently didn't matter anymore. I walked back into the house and sat at the kitchen table with my financial records spread out. Since Margaret died 3 years ago, I'd been keeping careful track of every dollar. When you're living on a contractor's pension and Social Security, you have to watch every penny. But looking at the numbers now, really looking at them, I saw something I'd been too guilty to admit. In the 3 years since Timothy met Brittany, I'd given them $47,000. There was the $15,000 I'd loaned him to start his graphic design business that never quite took off. He'd come to me with this whole presentation about modern marketing, digital this and social media that. I didn't understand half of it, but he was so excited, so sure it was going to work. The business folded after 8 months. Then there was the $8,000 when his car broke down, and he needed a reliable one for client meetings. A nearly new Honda that he said would help his professional image. I figured transportation was important for any business. The $6,000 when they had to move apartments suddenly because of mold issues. I never saw the apartment or any proof of mold, But Timothy said they needed to get out immediately for Brittany's health. The $12,000 for this wedding at the resort, and dozens of smaller amounts over the months. $500 here, $1,200 there, always some emergency that couldn't wait. Car insurance, medical bills, security deposits, urgent vendor payments. $47,000 was more than I earned in a full year when I started swinging a hammer at 23. It was the down payment on the house Margaret and I had saved 4 years to afford. It was Timothy's entire college fund that we'd built $75 at a time for 18 years, every payday without fail. I picked up my phone. 3 texts from Timothy, all sent after midnight. Dad, you're not mad, right? Brittany's family is just particular about these things. Can't wait for you to see me walk down the aisle with Uncle Carl and Mr. Wells. Uncle Carl, who couldn't tell a Phillips head from a flathead screwdriver. Uncle Carl, who'd never spent a summer teaching Timothy how to frame a wall or wire an outlet. Uncle Carl, who was taking the place I'd earned through years of being there, of showing up, of being the father who built things with his hands and his heart. My hands shook as I set the phone down. Something inside me had broken. Not in a loud way, but quietly, finally, like an old rope that's been fraying for years and finally hits its last thread. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts. The joint checking account I'd set up for Timothy's emergencies showed a balance of $2,100. It should have been closer to $8,000. I clicked on the recent transactions and my stomach dropped. $800 withdrawal. Car insurance emergency $1,500 withdrawal. Medical bill can't wait $2,200 withdrawal. Wedding vendor deposit urgent, all within the last month. All while I was writing checks for wedding costs. All while they were planning to replace me with Uncle Carl, like I was some distant relative who might embarrass them at their fancy resort wedding. I called my bank. First National, this is Kevin. How can I help you? Hi, Kevin. This is Victor Coleman. I need to remove someone from my joint checking account. There was a pause, the sound of typing. All right, Mr. Coleman, let me pull up your account. Can I ask who you're removing? My son. Okay, sir. I'll need to verify some information, and then I can walk you through the process. I spent the rest of that morning making calls. The bank, my credit union, my investment guy, every account where Timothy had access, every automatic transfer I'd set up to make his life easier. I closed them all. When I finished, my hands were steady for the first time in hours. That afternoon, I drove to a coffee shop across town and ordered black coffee I didn't really want. I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't my house, somewhere that didn't echo with Margaret's absence and Timothy's betrayal, somewhere I could think clearly about what I'd just discovered. The coffee shop was mostly empty, a few college kids with laptops, an older woman reading a paperback novel. Normal people living normal lives, not discovering their children had been systematically bleeding them dry while planning to humiliate them in public. I was halfway through the coffee when my phone rang. Timothy. I stared at the screen for a moment, watching it vibrate against the table. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I needed to hear what he'd say. Dad? His voice was tight, angry. What did you do? What do you mean? The bank called me. They said you removed me from your accounts, all of them. That's right. Why would you do that? He wasn't asking, he was demanding. Like I owed him an explanation for controlling my own money. Because I'm not a bank, Timothy. I'm your father. I don't understand what that's supposed to mean. I set the coffee down carefully. The woman with the paperback was glancing over, probably wondering why some old guy was having a family argument. In public, it means I'm done being treated like an ATM with a heartbeat. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising. We needed that money. My business is just getting started, and we have expenses. So do I. You're retired. What expenses do you have? I laughed. A bitter sound that surprised even me. I'm 58, Timothy, not dead. I have a mortgage, utilities, medical bills, car insurance. I have a life beyond writing checks for your emergencies. You have plenty of money, he shot back. You're just being petty because of the rehearsal dinner thing. Petty? The word hit like a slap. The rehearsal dinner thing? You mean the part where you replaced me with Uncle Carl? Where you decided the father, who taught you everything about building and fixing and being a man, wasn't good enough to walk you down the aisle? It's not about good enough. It's about what Brittany's family wants. They're traditional. Traditional? I stood up, pacing to the window. I paid $47,000 over the last 3 years. Timothy, $47,000. That's not traditional. That's a down payment on a house. That's a new truck. That's 2 years of my pension. Silence on the other end. The college kids were staring now too. I turned away from them, lowering my voice. And you know what? I continued. I was happy to do it. I wanted to do it because you're my son and I love you. But I'm not paying for the privilege of being treated like I don't matter. Dad, you're overreacting. No, I said. I'm finally reacting appropriately. What's that supposed to mean? It means the bank is closed, Timothy. Permanently. I could hear him breathing fast and shallow. You can't do this. Not now. The wedding is in 2 weeks. The wedding is paid for, I said. Every penny. You'll have your perfect day with Uncle Carl and all of Brittany's traditional family. We need money for the honeymoon, he said, his voice shifting softer now, pleading. We were counting on you to help with that. You always said you'd help us get started. I've given you $47,000 in 3 years, Timothy. You're started. More than started. 47? He sounded genuinely shocked. That can't be right. It's right. I have the records. Every check, every transfer, every time you called with an emergency that couldn't wait. Another long silence. I could picture him sitting there, maybe with Brittany next to him, coaching him on what to say next. Dad, he said finally, and his voice was cold now. Different. If you cut us off, you're going to regret this. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. It wasn't the voice of the little boy I'd taught to use a level. It wasn't the teenager who used to help me on weekend construction jobs for extra spending money. This was something else, something calculated. Is that a threat? It's a fact, he said. We'll handle this our way. The line went dead. I stood in that coffee shop, holding my silent phone, while strangers pretended not to watch the old man whose family was falling apart in public. 3 days passed. Quiet. Days. I worked on the truck, organized the garage, fixed the loose board on the back porch. Normal things that made me feel like I was taking pieces of my life back. Small repairs that actually stayed fixed, unlike the relationship with my son that I'd been trying to patch for years. Thursday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in his 40s, expensive suit, leather briefcase, the kind of polished smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Victor Coleman? Yes. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. You've been served. My stomach dropped. Served with what? A lawsuit. Your son and his fiancée are suing you for breach of oral contract and promissory estoppel. They're seeking damages for financial commitments you allegedly promised but failed to deliver. He handed me the envelope and walked away without another word. I stood in my doorway holding the envelope like it was contaminated. A lawsuit. My own son was suing me. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table. My hands shook as I opened it. Complaint for breach of contract. Plaintiffs Timothy Coleman and Brittany Wells. Defendant Victor Coleman. I scanned the pages, my vision blurring. The defendant made repeated verbal promises to provide financial support for the plaintiff's business ventures and honeymoon expenses. The plaintiffs relied on these promises in good faith, making commitments they cannot now fulfill. The defendant willfully and maliciously withdrew promised support, causing significant financial and emotional distress. Amount sought: $15,000 for honeymoon expenses, business startup costs, and emotional distress. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. They weren't just asking for honeymoon money. They were asking for damages for the crime of stopping them from bleeding me dry. Emotional distress for not letting them treat me like a walking wallet. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Coleman? This is Nancy Foster, attorney at law. I'm calling because a colleague mentioned your situation. Do you have legal representation? How did you know about this? Small legal community, she said. Cases like yours are more common than you'd think. Have you been served yet? 20 minutes ago. Would you be willing to meet with me this afternoon? No charge for consultation. 2 hours later, I sat across from Nancy Foster in her downtown office. She was maybe 50, sharp eyes behind reading glasses, the kind of calm presence that made you feel like things might actually work out okay. She read through the complaint, making notes, her expression unchanging. Well, she said finally, This is textbook financial elder abuse disguised as a contract dispute. Elder abuse? I'm 58. You're a widower with adult children making financial demands under threat of legal action. That's abuse. She leaned forward. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. So I did. The business support, the wedding costs, the joint accounts, the rehearsal dinner exclusion, Uncle, Carl replacing me, the threat, all of it. Do you have documentation? She asked when I finished. Everything. Bank statements, canceled checks, text messages. I keep detailed records. For the first time, she smiled. Good. Because we're not just going to defend this lawsuit, we're going to destroy it. She pulled out a legal pad. Here's what's going to happen. They're claiming you made promises, but a promise to give a gift isn't legally enforceable unless it's in writing. And even if it were, you've already given them tens of thousands. Any reasonable person would say, you've more than fulfilled any moral obligation. What about the emotional distress claim? Desperation, Nancy said. People who file suits like this are usually in financial trouble and see a parent as an easy target. They expect you to fold because you love your son and don't want the embarrassment. I'm not folding, I can see that. She made another note. We'll file a response denying all claims, then we'll counterclaim for harassment and abuse of process. If they really want to push this, we'll demand they repay every penny you gave them over the past 3 years. Over the next week, Nancy and I built our case. Every bank statement going back 3 years, every text where Timothy asked for money, every email where I said yes, every withdrawal from the joint account. The paper trail was devastating. We organized it all in a thick binder with tabs and highlights. Nancy called it our nuclear option. The following Tuesday, I was replacing a faucet in the bathroom when a car pulled up. Timothy's Honda. He got out, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy day, and walked toward me like he owned the sidewalk. We need to talk, he said. I have a lawyer now, Timothy. You should talk to her. I'm not here about the lawsuit. He crossed his arms. I'm here about the wedding. My chest tightened. What about it? He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if it was from anger or something else. Brittany and I have been talking, he said. We've decided maybe it's better if you don't come. The world tilted sideways. Don't come to your wedding? It's going to be awkward with everything that's happening. The lawsuit, you cutting us off, making this whole thing about money. We don't want that energy on our special day. Making it about money. The kid who was suing me for $15,000 was accusing me of making things about money. Timothy, you're the one suing me for $15,000. Because you promised, he snapped. You've always promised to be there for me. And now, when I actually need you, you're being selfish. Selfish. There was that word again. I've given you nearly $50,000, and we're grateful, he said, but his tone said otherwise. But that doesn't mean you get to control our lives. This is our wedding, our day, our decision. I paid for it. So what? You think that buys you the right to judge us? To embarrass us? I hadn't made any scenes. I'd just stopped saying yes to every demand. He stepped closer. You know what? Fine. Keep your money, keep your boundaries, but don't expect to be part of our lives anymore. Brittany's family warned me about this. They said you'd try to manipulate me, use money to control me. I didn't believe them, but I was wrong. Each word hit like a physical blow. I have never tried to control you. Then why are you doing this? Why are you ruining the happiest time of my life? Because I'm your father, not your piggy bank. He stared at me, and for just a second I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or recognition. But it vanished as quickly as it came. Don't come to the wedding, he said again. I'll have your name removed from the guest list. He turned and walked back to his car. I stood in my driveway, tools in my hands, watching my son drive away from the house where I'd raised him, where I'd taught him everything I knew about being a man. That night, I called Nancy. He uninvited me from the wedding. I'm sorry, Victor. Don't be. I think it clarifies things. How so? Now I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Nancy's voice hardened. Then let's give them the fight they asked for. 2 weeks later, we stood in a courtroom. Not a big dramatic room like in movies, just a small civil court chamber with fluorescent lights and worn carpeting. Timothy and Brittany sat with their lawyer on one side. I sat with Nancy on the other. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, Judge Patricia Reynolds, with reading glasses on a chain and the demeanor of someone who'd heard every excuse ever invented. Timothy's lawyer went first. young, overconfident, the kind of attorney who probably charged by the syllable. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of promissory estoppel. Mr. Coleman made repeated specific promises to fund his son's business ventures and honeymoon expenses. The couple relied on these promises in good faith and are now left in financial distress due to his capricious withdrawal of support. Capricious. As if stopping someone from bleeding you dry was a whim. He presented their evidence. Text messages where I'd said, "Don't worry, I'll help." Emails where I'd written, "I want you to have the wedding you're dreaming of." Voicemails where I'd told Timothy, "I've got you covered," all taken out of context, all twisted to look like binding contracts. Then Timothy testified. He wore a dark suit, hair slicked back, looking like the responsible young man I'd raised. "My father has always been my rock," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "After Mom died, he promised he'd take care of me, that I'd never have to worry." He dabbed his eyes with a tissue. "My business partner and I planned our startup expansion based on Dad's promise. We booked the honeymoon, made commitments. And then out of nowhere, he cut us off, said horrible things about Brittany, accused us of using him. He looked directly at me. I don't understand what happened to my father. It's like he became a different person." Then Nancy stood up, calm and precise. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs would have this court believe that Mr. Coleman abandoned his son. Nothing could be further from the truth." She opened our binder. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Coleman has given the plaintiffs $47,000, not lent, given with no expectation of repayment and no written agreement. She walked Judge Reynolds through the documentation, every check, every transfer, every time I'd said yes. "This is not a man who fails to support his son," Nancy said. "This is a man who was systematically exploited until he finally said enough." Then I testified. I told the judge about the rehearsal dinner, about Uncle Carl replacing me, about the unauthorized withdrawals, about the threat Timothy made when I closed the accounts. "Your Honor," I said, "I would have given my son anything. I did give him everything, but the moment I stopped, he sued me and banned me from his wedding. That's not a son seeking his father's support. That's someone who sees me as a resource to be mined." The courtroom was quiet when I finished. Judge Reynolds removed her glasses. "Let me make sure I understand. Your clients received $12,000 for a wedding, $15,000 for a business venture, and multiple other payments totaling $47,000 over 3 years. And now they're suing for an additional $15,000 because Mr. Coleman declined to fund their honeymoon?" Timothy's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the promises were made." "Alleged promises," the judge interrupted. "Verbal statements of support are not binding contracts, especially when the defendant has already provided substantial assistance far exceeding any reasonable expectation." She looked at Timothy and Brittany. "This court categorically denies the plaintiff's claim." Relief flooded through me, but she wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm troubled by the timing and nature of this lawsuit. Filing for emotional distress while simultaneously excluding the defendant from a wedding. He funded suggests this action was brought in bad faith." She looked at Timothy's lawyer. "I'm ordering the plaintiffs to pay Mr. Coleman's legal fees." The gavel came down. In the hallway afterward, Nancy shook my hand. "You did it, Victor." Through the courtroom doors, I could see Timothy and Brittany arguing in hushed, angry voices. Their lawyer was packing his briefcase with sharp, frustrated movements. "Do you think he'll ever understand?" I asked Nancy. Nancy looked at them and shook her head. "Some people never do. But that's not your responsibility anymore." I walked out of that courthouse into the bright Phoenix afternoon. The air smelled like desert rain and possibility. Over the following months, my life changed in small, important ways. I started volunteering at a trade school, teaching young men the skills I'd spent 35 years perfecting. I found family in my students, kids who appreciated what I had to offer, who saw value in hard work and honest craftsmanship. I traveled, drove up to the Grand Canyon, visited my old Army buddy in Colorado, ate good barbecue in Texas. I lived for myself, not for Timothy's expectations or anyone else's demands. 6 months later, I received a letter, simple envelope, handwriting I recognized. "Dad, Brittany, and I separated last month. Turns out she was only interested in me as long as the money was flowing. My business failed too. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm starting to understand what happened. I treated you like you were only valuable for what you could provide. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I see it now. What I did, what I lost. I'm sorry, Dad. Timothy. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in my desk drawer. Maybe I'd respond someday. Maybe I wouldn't. But for now, I was okay with the silence. That evening, I stood on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and red. Margaret would have loved this view, this peace. I thought about her sometimes, wondered what she'd think of all this. I believed she'd be proud, not of the lawsuit or the pain, but of the man who finally learned to value himself. I'd built a good life with these hands, raised a son the best I knew how. And when that wasn't enough, I'd learned to build something else. Boundaries, self-respect, a future that belonged to me. My name is Victor Coleman. I'm 58 years old, and I've learned that love doesn't mean letting people destroy you. Sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone where you end and they begin. For the first time in years, I sleep well at night, knowing I did the right thing. My life belongs to me, and that's exactly how it should be. I learned that enabling someone's destructive behavior isn't love. It's participating in their failure, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be part of the problem. Real strength isn't about how much you can give or endure. It's about knowing when to say no and having the courage to walk away from people who mistake your kindness for weakness.